Hey everyone, welcome to my studio here in sunny Colorado where it's almost spring and I'm getting really excited. My name is Melanie Kline and I've been so lucky to have spent my whole life in this field. I really want to share what I've learned with you. I've always had a retail store along with my workshop, so I've learned the ins and outs of marketing my work, designing, producing, and selling. And this video series will cover those things. It's 4 parts. The first one, and the most important one, is developing fine craftsmanship. Section 2 will be about the design, construction, production, and pricing of your jewelry line. Section 3 will be bringing your line to market. Section 4 will be closing that sale. So I hope that I can teach you something that I've learned through the years. We will talk about design and production, pricing, and marketing. But first and foremost, we will focus on fine craftsmanship and the mastery of technique, because that really is the basis of everything. Occasionally when I create these videos, I'll show you examples of my work that incorporate the particular technique I'm showing you in that video. This necklace is completely fabricated, primarily using a jeweler saw, piercing, and pierce overlay. I'll show you another example at the end of this video if you stick around. And if you enjoy seeing my work, let me know in the comment section below. So these are the usual problems that I hear as a teacher. My blade always breaks. I'm not sure which gauge of metal to use, when. I can't draw a pattern to pierce. My pattern lifts off the metal when I saw. I never know which size blade to use or when to use it. I'm not sure I'm using the right saw frame. What's the difference between the metals I'm trying to saw? And could this problem be my bench pin? I'm going to try to address a lot of those issues in this video. Here's what I'll cover: understanding basic sawing, applying your design to your metal, understanding basic pierce overlay technique, solder placement for basic pierce overlay, preventing fire scale, making and attaching a jump ring, and using Photoshop and your printer to assist you in design. The last one that I read, the Photoshop tutorial, I'm going to put at the end of this video. It's about 5 minutes long, and if you're not interested in it, you don't have to watch it. But I didn't want to put it here at the beginning. So the first and foremost thing is relax and let go. Most of the problems you encounter when sawing is that you're pushing and twisting, even if you don't know that you are. You have got to relax and guide the saw blade straight up and down and not push it. It will break if you push against it when it's not moving. The channel that you're cutting is narrower than the side of your saw blade. So if you twist it in the channel, it will snap, for sure. You will feel it stop or stick, and that's when you let go so that it can settle back into its proper position in the channel that it's cutting. I know it seems like the blade is the problem. Maybe you need to lubricate it. Maybe you have cheap blades. But I would say 80% of the time, the problem is that you are not relaxing that hand that's holding the handle, and you are pushing. Another reason it breaks is because the blade size is too small for the thickness of the metal that you're using. Take a look at the chart at the bottom of this picture for a good reference. I will tell you that 80% of the time I use a 2/0 blade. Also, copper and brass are very different to cut than sterling silver. Silver is smooth. Copper and brass drag. Copper's the worst. So it's much harder to cut through copper with a jeweler saw than it is sterling silver. This video is going to have a lot of important tips for you, so I hope you'll watch all the way through. I'm going to start by cutting a simple star shape using 20 gauge sterling silver sheet with a 2/0 blade. If I draw a design on paper instead of printing it, I usually use a pencil, and then I go over my final lines with a Uniball Deluxe fine point pen and erase my pencil marks before I glue. So first, it's essential that you sand the metal with emery cloth. This creates a surface that glue will stick to. If you're not doing this now, then it is the reason that your paper lifts away from the metal when you saw. I prefer this emery cloth to sandpaper because it doesn't tear, doesn't hold dirt or filings, and it stays clean longer. You can use any white glue, even the cheap ones, but don't use rubber cement or a glue stick. They're not as reliable. Make sure that you don't have any bumps of glue under your drawing. I'm careful to position my pattern at an edge of the metal when I glue it so that I don't waste any metal. After I position it, I smooth it out to spread out any bumps of glue, and then I use something round like a pen, or in this case a wooden skewer, whatever you have around, to roll out any excess before it dries. Bumps in your glue distort your drawing and can affect your accuracy of sawing. When I know it's dry, I trim the excess paper. I use my half-round file using a downward stroke that won't lift my paper pattern if it's not quite dry. I'm often using a piece of metal sheet that I've already cut from, and it'll have curves and cuts already in it. Filing the paper like this along any shape of edge helps me see the edge. Now, I start by lining up the saw blade against my fingernail as a guide. My first stroke is up. I know it looks like down, but that's just a pre-stroke to line it up. Gently guiding up and down, never squeezing the handle of the saw. The only pushing is by my other hand to hold the metal against the bench pin so it doesn't rise up with the saw blade stroke. As long as you hold the saw straight up and down, and you keep it moving all the time, holding the metal against the bench pin with your other hand, and turning the metal to adjust to the corners like this, watch, like this, you should do just fine. When you reach a corner or a curve, you have to keep moving up and down without pushing. You'll notice there's a difference in the saw frames that you can buy. Some are deeper than others. You'll need a deep saw frame if you do a lot of cutting on long sheets of metal. But if you're just using a piece of metal 3 inches or less, you don't need a deep saw frame at all. I don't like adjustable saw frames. The balance is different than the Green Lion or the Haymaker. Here I'm using the Green Lion. If your blade stops or sticks, it's because you're getting ahead of yourself and you're forcing it or twisting it. Let go of the metal. Just take your hand off of it. It will adjust itself back into the channel. If you keep cutting without doing that, you will probably snap your blade. Make sure to buy good blades and occasionally lubricate them with wax while you're cutting. Up and down, patiently guiding the blade, keeping that saw blade perpendicular to the metal that you're cutting. Now you'll notice that my bench pin has more than one little V cut out of it. That's because sometimes you need the big V and sometimes you need a smaller area to be able to support the metal from the top better. This paper comes off easily because it's only been on there for half an hour. But if it was longer, I'd probably need to run it under hot water to have it release. It's always important to straighten your edges and remove your saw blade marks with a file in order to end up with a professionally looking finished piece. Here I'm using a barrette file instead of a half-round file. I'll explain why I like that best just a little bit later in the video. This project is also to demonstrate a basic pierce overlay technique, meaning that I'm going to solder this star down to another piece of silver. If I don't file it now, I won't have access to the edges later. When it's all filed, I make sure it's clean and flat and put it aside. Next, I prepare another sheet of silver, which will be the bottom plate of my pierce overlay design. This time, 22 gauge is thick enough. When you solder 20 gauge to 22 gauge, it makes a nice standalone thickness, and it will feel substantial to your customer. As with any soldering, you have to make sure it's clean and free of anything that will contaminate the soldering process. At this point, before soldering, we need to talk about fire scale. Fire scale is the term for the copper oxidation that rises to the surface of sterling silver when you heat it. It's difficult to polish off, and it's good to prevent it if you can. If you mix boric acid with denatured alcohol to the thickness that I'm showing you here, you can dip your pieces in and light it till the alcohol burns off. You can't really prevent fire scale, but you can certainly lessen it by taking this step. Boric acid comes as a powder. You can buy it from Rio or sometimes from your hardware store. You can buy denatured alcohol there too. Remember, this is highly flammable, so keep it covered and away from your soldering area. As always, I'll be using hard solder. For flux, I'm using the yellow flux, known as Banterns, Floron, or Mighty Flux. If this were mixed metals, like silver on copper or brass, I would use Handy Flux instead. Did you hear that? Mixed metals, Handy Flux. Now flux the entire area that we'll be touching. Burn off the liquid till it leaves a crust. Here comes a very important lesson about solder placement. Pick up the pieces of solder and place them on the clean backside of the star. Melt them into a puddle and spread the solder like frosting with your solder pick. When you see it run, get in there with your solder pick and bring it around all the way to the edges. This is one of the times you'll need your dominant hand to be able to use the tools while you solder. That's why it's good to develop a habit to learn to use your torch in the other hand, your less dominant hand. When you know you've covered the back with a thin layer of solder, move your torch off of it and begin to heat your destination. Remember that the solder is attracted to the heat, and the back plate has to be hotter than the star. So warm it up and then pick up the star with your tweezers and put it in place on the back plate. I know it's hard for you to see the angle of my torch in this shot, but I'm avoiding heating the star and I'm just circling around it. After overall heating, lift with the tweezers and heat from below. Remember, the solder has already melted on the back of the star, so we need to get the back plate hot enough to remelt the solder and have them join. This much boric acid and flux sometimes makes the piece travel a little before the solder melts, but that's easily corrected with your tweezers. Just heat from below. Some people use a tripod and screen, but I don't. I find them to be way too much of a heat sink. Occasionally, you may want to hold the two pieces together with your tweezers if you find that it's slipping too much. Now I can see that my solder has run all around the star, but I don't think you can. So I'm going to heat it up again until I feel like the camera catches the solder flash all around the star. Watch for it. Do you see it? After quenching, you can see that the liquids I use leave a glaze, and that needs to be removed in your pickle and your ultrasonic. Here it is now, all clean but not sanded. I'm going to go over it with my yellow radial disc now. That brings it all up to a lightly sanded finish, which will reveal any imperfections that I need to get in and correct. Now here's what I really want you to see. Look closely. There are no traces, pits, or ghosts on the back plate that are often left to clean up when you use another method of solder placement. Many videos will tell you to rest little squares against the two pieces and then heat your piece. Please don't do that. There's times when that's appropriate, but those times really are rare. There is no reason to have to clean up a back plate where solder has spread or left a ghost in places where you didn't want it. If your pierced piece has complicated saw cuts, openings, and narrow places in the design, I would do something different than what I'm showing you here, and I will show it to you in a future video. I'm going to cut a border around the star to make it more interesting and to review piercing again. Now these edges need filing too, but this time I'm going to use a big file. I won't use my bastard file because it has square, sharp edge that could cut where I don't want it to. So I'm going to use my large half round since its edge tapers and I can avoid that risk. I'm going to file a little flat spot at the top of the star where I'm going to solder my jump ring. Now I'm going to put a little pattern around the outside edge with my flush cutters. You learned this method if you watched my video about making silver feathers. It's just a simple, angled, biting motion without cutting all the way through the metal. Okay, let's make jump rings. Here I'm using 18 gauge round wire. You can make them any diameter that's on your round nose pliers by winding the wire around the jaw in the same spot every time. Watch. You just keep feeding the length of the wire below each ring that you make so that you're always winding in the same place. And as you go, a coil of jump rings goes up the jaw of the pliers. Always make a bunch because you're bound to drop one. Using 2 pliers, bring the ends together till they're tight. Hold the jump ring in one of those pliers and file a little flat spot at the seam. Looks like I need to adjust the top of the star with a file just a little to match the jump ring. We're going to solder the jump ring to the star now. First, we will remember to dip it in the boric acid solution and light it. I'm going to turn off the lights so you can see how cool it is when the alcohol burns off. Flux the area to be soldered, burn off the liquid, and place a ball of solder on the flat spot that you filed in the jump ring. Melt it into a little puddle. Wow, you can see how sticky the combination of boric acid solution and flux makes everything. Get your jump ring in place at the top of the star. Okay, now heat the star, not the jump ring. The jump ring's already hot. It already has solder on it. It's very small in volume compared to the star and will melt if you overheat it, so don't. Use your solder pick to make sure they're pushed together and making contact. When the star is hot enough, the solder will flow and join the two. If it's not perfectly aligned, flow your solder again and adjust it with your solder pick. Okay, now here's something really important, so listen carefully. You have got to flip it over and heat it again to guarantee that you have flowed the solder all the way through the connection. Draw it to the back with your torch. I would bet that you have had a jump ring break off when you're handling or polishing your piece. This is why. We use the term cold soldered. Avoid that by remembering this step and bringing the solder all the way through every time. Sanding and doing some cleanup now, and it looks like there's more solder than I need at the jump ring connection. So I'm going to use my fine white snap-on sanding disc to remove and shape it. I told you about this tool when we made silver feathers in my other video. A quick final sanding with my blue radial disc wheel, and whoops, I see a little place I don't like. So I'm going to remove it with my barrette file. I really suggest you buy one of these. It's shaped like a broad triangle with cutting edges on the bottom and up one side. That means that the other side is a safe edge, and you can really get in there and take away any imperfection without accidentally scratching the metal with a sharp edge that you would have if you used your half-round file instead of your barrette file. So here I'm going to show you how to search for an image, copy it, import it into Photoshop, changing the image to a line drawing, rescale the image, and customize the image. And just a little disclaimer here, I'm using an old version of Photoshop, and if you have Photoshop, the location of the features may be different on yours than they are on mine. So the first thing we have to do is search for the image that we're looking for, and I'm looking for a 5-pointed star. So I type that into Google, and now I'm going to choose images, and it will bring up different images of 5-pointed stars. I'm going to choose one for you that's easy to see. I'm going to pick this red one, and I'm going to right click on this red one and say copy image. That puts it on my clipboard and brings it into other programs, in this case Photoshop. So I have to go up to the file menu in Photoshop and choose new, because I'm making a new file. I don't want it to be pixels, I want it to be inches, so I'm converting it there. I want it to have a higher resolution, so I'm going to put a different number there, 200, and I'm going to name it star. Choose OK, and it'll show you a canvas. At that point, choose paste from your edit menu and your star will appear. Now I don't want a red star, I want to have an outline, so I'm going to start by using my magic wand, choose the whole thing, and you can see that it's chosen by the line that's around it, and I chose fill, and I'm going to fill it black. Now up here under select, you'll scroll down and you'll see modify and contract, and you can choose how many pixels you want it to contract. Mine is on 3, and you can see that that dotted line shrunk. Then I just choose delete, and it deleted the whole center. So now I have a line drawing. I'm going to go in a little bit to make sure it's a good crisp line drawing, and I do like it. So back to this size. Now I'm going to change the canvas size to the size of my printer paper. This image is already 8.5 wide, so I need only to make it 11. And there it is. That's how it would appear from my printer, which is way too big, so I need to rescale it. I'm going to select it. I'm going to come down and choose transform and scale. And now, keeping my hand on Shift and Alt on my keyboard, I'm going to grab the corner and pull it in. And as I pull, it constrains the aspect ratio, so I still have the same proportions on the star that I had before. It's just much smaller. Now I've deselected it, and I need to know how much smaller I made it, so I'm going to choose it again by drawing a square around it. If I crop the image now, it will tell me what's left as a measurement. There you go. And I choose image size, and it's telling me that it's just over 1/2 inch, which is what I was after. So if I wanted to change it, I could just change those numbers and it would change the size. But I like it. Here it is. And it seems like the lines are going to be crisp enough for me to be able to follow with my saw. I'm going to name that layer Star because I want to show you what happens if we don't just keep it like it is, and I'll do it on another layer. So I'm going to come over here on Star, and I'm going to right click and say duplicate the layer. And now I have another layer of stars. There it is. And this here, I'll zoom in for you. And what I want to do right now is show you that you can change the shape of it and customize it to be whatever shape you want it to be and still maintain it being a star. So if you want a tall one, or you want a fat one, or you want something that's an angle, you can just do it all by grabbing the corners here. And when you like it, when you come to a point where you really like it and you want to try it, you can save it by applying the changes that you just made. I'll show you. There it was. It says apply transformation, and I said yes. Now I can grab it and I can move it around, and if I wanted to do multiple images and bring them close together so that I could cut them all at once, I could do that with this, but I'm not going to do that now. I just wanted to show you the possibilities. I'm going to delete that. Now I'm back to my original star, and now all I'm going to do is print it. This is a hinged cuff bracelet done with the pierce overlay technique that we've been talking about. All the elements that you see are all cut with a saw and soldered to the cuff. The other thing that's interesting about this bracelet is that I actually used fire scale in the sky. So you can see I only polished off the parts where I wanted it to be clouds, and the rest of the sky is fire scale, which was kind of fun. Anyway, I sure appreciate you watching. I hope you learned something, and I hope you go practice. Thanks.